Jæja, gott fólk, þá ættum við öll að vera búin að hressa okkur aðeins á kaffi og tilbúin í næstu erindi. Nú koma hérna 2 erindi sem verða flutt á ensku. Fyrra erindið ber heitið How does forest fire impact above ground tree biomass in Iceland og flutt af henni Rebekah D'Arcy. Hún skógfræðingur og aðstofamaður við gróðureldarannsóknir í Háskóla Íslands. Svo ég ætla bara að bjóða hana velkomna hérna. The floor is yours, Rebekah.
Okay, awesome. Hi, my name's Rebekah, so most people know me as Becky, and I'm a recent forester from Bangor University, and I've got a passion for wildfire subjects since I recently did my master's thesis on this with Bangor University. So I'm going to talk about that today. My main topic was how does forest fire impact above ground tree biomass in Iceland? So it's mainly a study about fire effects. It's not working.
Pointing at this here.
Okay.
Okay. Is it right?
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Steph. So just to begin, I'd like to note that there's a global increase in uncontrollable wildfires and forest fires, which are causing devastating and diverse effects. And this is why this research topic is so important. The UN have listed many different fire effects that occur on a global scale, and the ones I'm going to focus on today are mainly to do with loss of biodiversity and emissions. Fire effect studies provide readiness and preparedness in face of these events. And why is it important to study them? Well, they help increase our understanding of fire in the landscape, that is to say the factors of fire, fire ecology, the fire regime, and post-fire recovery. And also, they help us to inform management decisions at the local scale to help reduce the risks of severity. As we see on the right here, this is a diagram that represents integrated fire management. And there are many different factors that we can take into consideration, such as readiness, which we talked about before, fuel reduction, response, and how is the recovery in the landscape. In Iceland, the management is mainly focused on intervention and response. This means planning to actually suppress the fire in its tracks. So fires are documented in Iceland since 2006, but since there's a limited occurrence in fires in Iceland, there's been limited research. However, there is an increase in risk, which means that we have to be more prepared. The largest forest fire occurred in Heiðmörk in 2021. And this provides a great opportunity to start collecting Icelandic specific fire data to improve our reporting, research, and management. And this is in line with the readiness that we talked about earlier, and also UN requirements and regarding forest fire reporting, and also the requirements, the suggestions of the Icelandic Environment Agency in the latest missions report. So my study was mainly aiming to evaluate and analyze how fire affects above ground tree biomass, as I already mentioned. And I collected data in Heiðmörk to do this study. It was in 2 parts. So firstly, I focused on emissions estimates using Icelandic single tree biomass equations. Then I focused on the factors and impacts of the fire on tree burn damage and tree mortality using logistic regression analysis. This is a technique used widely in fire effects research. And I came up with quite a few hypotheses for both of these different impacts, because there are multiple factors of fire. So what did I do? Well, I applied systematic sampling to increase the representativeness of my sample size. So I also collected primary and secondary data. And the fieldwork, I did an Icelandic forest inventory, where I collected data for the trees, that is to say DBH, for example, in vegetation, And they also devised a tree survey based on literature findings regarding post-fire assessment to try and understand the relationships between factors and impacts on the trees in this particular site. I also applied post-stratification after I collected my data. There are different types of post-stratification in fire effect studies, and here I did this to later scale the biomass estimates or the emissions estimates to the site level. In green we have open ground mixed forests, which is vaster open areas with scattered trees. In pink, mixed broadleaves. In red, mixed conifers, which are mainly planted areas. And in blue, the native birch woodland. For the impacts assessment and analysis, I applied, like I said, the Icelandic single tree biomass equations. And I firstly did this at tree species group level, and then I scaled it to site level. I also used conversion factors to obtain carbon and carbon dioxide. For the factors in the impacts analysis, I firstly had to prepare the data and did some summer statistics to understand the trends and also to reduce the number of variables that I was going to put into my statistical test. And as you can see on the right, it's quite a lot of data, it's quite a lot of information, but there's 8 main predictive variables that were tested in the 2 logistic regression models that were for tree burn damage and tree mortality. Let's go to the results. So firstly, I want to talk about I want to talk about part 1 of the results, which is about above ground tree biomass loss and emissions. So at first, at tree species group level, we can see that there's a low presence of certain species such as poplar and larch in the sample. When I applied the biomass equations, the highest amount of biomass was, that is living trees, was in Pinus contorta, whereas the dead biomass, or the necromass, was in, the highest amount was in birch and sorbus. And there was an overall highest mean biomass and necromass in the Salix species group. When I was scaling these equations to site level, I noticed that for my strata, that there was only one plot that contained native birch woodland, and other plots were equally represented. When scaling to site level, I noticed also that there was a higher proportion of emissions in mixed broadleaves compared to mixed conifers. Let's talk about this. So firstly, since my study, I achieved the objective of estimating emissions from this site, it was difficult to say whether these were actually high or low emissions in the grand scheme of things. But the emissions are low compared to other sectors and even the remainder of the AFOLU sector, the agriculture, forestry and other land use sector. But it's important to note that this was the first study to try to apply data that was collected in the field to estimate forest fire emissions in Iceland. And so maybe the data was a bit limited. And I also asked myself why there was a high rate of emissions in mixed broadleaves compared to mixed conifers, since generally conifers are more ignitable. Well, this could be linked to the post-stratification. As I said before, there's different ways of post-stratification and post-fire research, and I could have done this differently. Calculation method also assumed that the whole tree was either dead or alive, and I didn't integrate individual living and dead sections of trees into this calculation method. So to improve estimate reliability, we need to increase and standardize the data collection and standardize post-stratification with regards to post-fire assessment. And as I said, the study objective was met, and I was able to collect the data and report on it. In part 2 of my study, I looked at the impacts of the different factors of forest fire on trees in the sample. Firstly, I can say that in general, the 74% of the trees in the sample of 223 trees suffered moderate or high damage. And there was an almost even split of living and dead trees in the sample. Now, this is the results of the logistic regression model for tree burn damage. but I'm going to just kind of talk about them and not talk about the figures. But it's important to note that why am I talking about these results in particular is because these correspond to hypotheses that showed significant results. So hypothesis 1.2 is contradicted in this study. Increased vegetation did not necessarily increase the level of damage. This could be linked to the fact that some plots the plots with higher vegetation cover had higher levels of grassland, so not many trees. And the plots with low to medium cover had more ladder fuels, that is the fuels that let the fire spread to the canopy. And it could also be linked to the fact that my observations were made post-fire and there would have already been some post-fire recolonization. Hypothesis 1.4 was also contradicted. The height of the shorter trees were not more damaged than taller trees, which could be linked to the unevenness in height in the sample for damaged trees, but also the lesser amount of ladder fuels in these areas. But hypothesis 1.8 was tree burn damage increases with increased slope gradient was supported. For the tree mortality model, hypothesis 2.1 was supported. That is to say, tree mortality increased with increased plant litter. Plant litter at the time of the fire would have been a lot drier. And also since there was no rainfall, it's important to note that fuel moisture is key for fire ignition. For 2.4, tree mortality increases with decreased height. This was also supported. There was a higher amount of ladder fuels in areas where I'd observed trees that had been killed in the fire. Hypothesis 2.8, however, was contradicted since slope gradient did not increase tree mortality in this study. We saw an image of the site earlier and how the fire spread across the site according to information that I'd collected. It's important to note that the fire began below the steepest section of the site, and this may have been therefore limited intensity in the beginning phases and therefore limiting the mortality. And there's a general unevenness in height in the sample, as we said before, and the patchy vegetation. Perhaps this suggests a mixed severity fire. 5 minutes. Thank you. It's important to note that these results contribute to knowledge about how fire interacts in the landscape in Iceland. And also it provides a basis for future research, reporting and management. And what I would say was the implication here was that we can continue to develop now country-specific integrated fire management at landscape scale. But what does that mean? That means that, here are some examples. So we're going back to that round circle thing that I showed you earlier. So firstly, when we talk about readiness, we can use software, or we can even develop our own, which like I tried to in this study, to understand the fire behavior and fire effects in the landscape. These are just some of the tools that you can use, but we can also develop Icelandic specific ones. And fuel reduction. So, I mean, some of these images are going to be a bit controversial, but we can mechanically remove the fuels. We can also use grazing. And also this is an image of me doing prescribed fire in Portugal. Prescribed fire is used traditionally to reduce levels and quantities of vegetation in a landscape that can help reduce the impacts of maybe larger scale wildfires that come later on. And also we can continue to act on intervention and response. So by adding this fire weather index that can give us an idea of the danger rating at any given day in the year. And we can also continue to use support from Broadleaf, which is a committee in Iceland for fire prevention. And also, intervene with other solutions. And this is a picture in Heiðmörk during the fire. But then we can perhaps then limit the risk in this whole cycle of having to intervene in larger scale wildfires if we practice other techniques. And then the recovery is also important to monitor because there's latent tree mortality. Insects can come kind of like finished already alien trees off. And we can also look at the resilience of certain species and how that happens in the landscape. Rehabilitation is also important. Maybe we want to plant or reseed or use other mechanical methods to restore our sites post-fire. And also looking at the actual carbon cycle from severe or to low impact fires in the landscape. So I hope that it's kind of clear. Some conclusions here are that in part 1 there was quite low emissions compared to other sectors, that they were higher in mixed broadleafs in this study compared to conifers. And in the impacts analysis, some of the hypotheses corresponded to literature while others didn't necessarily. But this is one of the first studies in Iceland to collect and apply field data for estimating forest fire emissions and to analyze how certain characteristics of fuels and topography influence tree damage and mortality. And despite the limitations that I've kind of addressed throughout this presentation, I managed to answer some of my research questions. And I would recommend now anticipating and reducing or trying to reduce the risk in Iceland, even though it's not such a problem right now. It could become a bigger risk with the fact that we're planting a lot of trees, etc., etc. And we can increase data collection for more reliability on reporting. We can use this integrated fire management tool, and we can continue to unite together to discuss how we want to approach this, and obviously continue the research. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebekah. This was extremely interesting and a field that we haven't paid very much attention to in Iceland already, so very informative. Do we have 1 or 2 questions to Rebekah? Everything crystal clear? Bjarni, okay.
Thank you. This was a very interesting talk. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
And now you just need really big fire to do more research, right?
Yeah. I don't know if that was a question.
No, it was a joke. It was a joke. But sorry about that. But it is very important. And now you are here to stay for some time. So what would you like to do next? Because now you have the chance. Now you can tell August and everybody what we should do.
Yeah. So just to say that currently I'm working on a small project with Háskóli Íslands, University of Iceland, about fire modeling risk, and I'm actually using some of this software to try to collect the vegetation data, the topography data, to start to understand fire modeling. And I think it could be the beginning of maybe gaining more research. But me personally, I would like to, I'd like to have this as part of my job, because I'm really interested in it. And also I want to I don't know that many people that I know individuals that are interested in this subject, but I know that it's Góða Elver, but I think that maybe I'd like to reunite with these people and discuss what they think and how they see it, and maybe just present what I've done, because I know I've seen there was a meeting with I think the Forestry Association here and the fire service. I know there's stuff going on at Akranes. I've read a lot of things, and now I want to participate in the bigger picture.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.